Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Mike Doran. I'm a veteran analyst of the Middle East, and this is my inaugural tape on YouTube. And I'm really excited to have here with me today Gadi Taub from Israel. Gadi is an historian. He's a PhD from Rutgers University. He's a novelist. He's a screenwriter. And many more things as well, as you'll get to know in just a few minutes. Gadi, welcome.
Thank you. And don't be impressed by Israelis with long resumes. We never make enough money on any one job, so we have to do this. We have to.
No, I think it's really impressive. In fact, you know, when I was getting ready for this interview with you, I discovered that you were a screenwriter. I didn't know that, and in fact, one of your big credits, Harem, is on Amazon Prime. You can watch it for free.
And no one told me, you see? I'm going to have to check with my agent now, because I'm sure it's free for you, but it shouldn't be free for Amazon.
Yeah, so you got some money coming to you, and you don't know about that. Listen, you say you have this long list of credits to yourself. Which one of those titles, a professor, novelist, screenwriter, which one of them do you identify most with, or do you identify with any of them? When you go to bed at night and it's dark and you think about, who am I? You know, does God love me? What do you think of yourself as?
You know, there's no, the word writer in English would have been best, but we don't have that. Sofer is fiction writer. So a friend of mine who's a playwright hung a sign on his door saying katvan, which is a non-word, but is a sort of way to say a writer. So I guess, you know, people with passion for writing, whenever you put together something that you're happy with, words, then you feel you're doing your job. But of course, you know, writing about politics is something that really sucks you in, because then you get into all these fights and you go on Twitter, and especially in Israel, you know, Israel is a very, very loud culture. Well, you know Israel. So you get dragged into horrendously loud fights, and also you make up with people after it very quickly. But we are suffering now something very similar to what America is going through, is that the two sides of the political spectrum have completely lost the ability to talk to each other, which is partly why I follow you so scrupulously on Twitter, because you seem to be able to speak a language that both sides understand. Does that mean that they both hate you, or that they both can listen to you?
You know, I don't know, but I do. That's really nice of you to say, because I try to do that. Actually, I try to write in a way that even if you don't disagree with me, you can engage with the ideas. I mean, I have a couple of rules on Twitter, which you don't follow, by the way. I don't. I almost never attack people personally. I kind of have a rule: if you come on my Twitter feed and you have a blue check mark on your name and you start attacking me personally, then I will probably say something nasty to you about yourself. But by and large, I don't do it. I see you'll go on other people's Twitter. I can't remember who. I was reading your Twitter feed yesterday, and you went after somebody, and you said that.
Because you know, I get attacked so often and so wildly that it just became so that if no one attacks me, I feel like, what did I do wrong? Did I miss something?
You don't feel validated unless somebody's yelling at you.
Yeah, and this is also very Israeli.
I think a psychiatrist could have a field day with that.
And Israel, you know, I was at this academic conference. I don't remember what it is, probably 15 years ago or so, at Harvard. And it was about Hebrew literature. And they have scholars of Hebrew literature there. And when I gave my paper, an Israeli critic, rose in the middle of my paper, and it's an academic setting, stood up in the audience and said, "You are a traitor to your generation," like, you know, hectoring me, like in the middle of the talk. And we sat together at dinner, and people didn't get it, you know, Harvard people. What is this? we should, but it's very common here. You can have like a terrible fight with someone and then text them and ask them for something, and usually,
Oh, yeah, that's also kind of a Jewish thing, isn't it? There's a, you know, the Israelis have this concept that we don't have. I mean, I mean, a lot of different kinds of people in America, so some Americans do, but ani beroga zitcha, you know, and
uh-huh.
like you could,
Again,
you, you go and you make a point of telling somebody that you're really angry with them and you're just not going to treat them nicely anymore. And that's the beginning. I take it that that's a beginning of a negotiation, isn't it?
it's always engaging. While for Israelis, I think it's really hard the way Americans can disengage, because we are a culture that where you can't disengage. It's too, everything's too small, everything's too intimate, and it's a community culture from not from the days from days immemorial, not just from Israel. So I think you take into account that you're going to have to live with your enemies too. While in America, you can just, you know, rent a U-Haul and just
The,
go
cul-
somewhere else.
the culture is different too. You know, I almost got in a fist fight with an Israeli once, and I don't think in my adult life I've gotten into a fist fight. But I was driving. I was a student there, and this is in the 1980s, and I was driving the brand new Peugeot of a professor actually. And I went to Tel Aviv. I was in Haifa. I went down to Tel Aviv in this Peugeot, and this Israeli guy, I was at a stop sign and he was trying to get into my lane. He wanted to get in front of me, and so he was crowding in really close, and he didn't know how to drive very well, and he scratched the whole, he just drove right along as I'm sitting there parked and scratched all along the side of the car. I'm a kid, I'm driving some guy's new Peugeot, which in Israel cost a fortune, and this guy scratched it up, and I pulled over to the side, and I was just trying to control my emotions. And the guy walked up to me, and he heard my accent, and he immediately thought, oh, I can take advantage of this guy. And so he starts denying that he did it. You know, like he just it's undeniable. And I just you know, I totally lost it, and I was about to strangle him. And the minute I started to get physical, then another guy jumped in, broke it up. He admitted there was a, but it's funny. You can watch Israelis, Italians are the same way. They'll start screaming at each other, calling each other names, and it never goes to that physical point, right? They just, whereas in America, it goes from being very tightly bound up, I mean, and civil. And then if it escalates, then it's going to go physical. There's no, there isn't that, yeah, it's going to go to, there isn't that medium range. That sort of hold me back, medium range. So Mediterranean do a lot more of that sort of.
Yeah, there's more room to negotiate. I think in America, you are, from my American experience, you can lose friendships easily. You say the wrong thing, and it's awkward, and then people ignore you, and very fast you start. And in Israeli, you often don't know what it is you did. You know,
right.
You don't know. I had a teacher walk out in the middle of my speaking in my graduate studies at Rutgers. I had a very harsh comment about some postmodern something that they gave us to read. So I was was worked up, and I may have spoken, but he collected his stuff and he walked out of class. And I was flabbergasted. I didn't know that could be done.
That was the end of the relationship?
It was with him, certainly, but it was I think they solved it well. The head of the chair invited me for a talk. He said, you know, this is what the teacher did is not something teachers are supposed to do, but also you were being very
you were a bad boy.
direct or something.
Yeah.
So I was being rude, but you know, the thing is, Israelis, when they come to America, when they get a rejection letter, they think they have been accepted. Because, you know, in American rejection letters, you read all these compliments, and only at the very end it says, however, at this time. And an Israeli reads that and he said, they loved me. They're just waiting for an opening.
That's funny.
An
Listen,
American would read it and said,
we're already getting off topic. This is the subject we're having here today. We're going to talk about the how the coronavirus is going to change the world. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about you, and let me start by just telling you what I'm trying to do with this YouTube channel. I had I just have this idea. You know, you mentioned that we're polarized. We are so polarized, and the press now is incredibly polarized. And the press has become the press today is not the press I grew up with. The press I grew up with was always, you know, the mainstream media was always left wing, but it wasn't a conscious actor in the political scene. And now it's a conscious actor, and everything they have, the press has its thumb on the scales in everything it writes, including about the Middle East, my area of expertise. So I thought, you know, wouldn't it be nice to have some conversations with intelligent people who have critiques of the press narrative? That's but intelligent conversations, not just railing against the politicization. I don't want it to just be the opposite of what we're hearing, but just to have an intelligent conversation. That's the idea, and I'm calling it Counterbalance. And I thought, what a great, who could be better than you to start this with? Because first of all, this is what you're doing, I think, every day in Israel. And you could bring an Israeli perspective to people who in America who are interested in Israel, who don't know your work and don't know where you're coming from. And you thought, one of the things that's so attractive about you is that you've really thought it all through, I think, at all levels. You understand the cultural side, you understand the intellectual side, you got a sense of what's going on in the United States, you know what's going on in you're a player on the Israeli scene. So I just couldn't think of anyone better. And so I'm really happy you agreed to do this.
I'm flattered.
Great to have you here. Now, let's just talk a little bit about you, though, because you're you know, I've known you for a couple of years, but I don't know you that well. I gather that you have a trajectory that you went from the left to the right. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. I guess I was on the left in all senses of the word, like in the American sense of the word, in the Israeli sense, which is split between two things. Between what we call left here is doves on international relations on the one hand, and economy and free market and non-free market or bigger government on the other hand. And the issues in Israel they can be split more so than in America. I think there are people who are strict doves but are social democrats,
right?
Who would vote for a Bernie Sanders in terms of economics here, but would vote for a Reaganite candidate in terms of foreign policy. So, I moved on all fronts. I was always on the Zionist left. So I never had the disease of the left, which is anti-nationalism. Mm-hmm. And even when I was very strictly on the left, my argument was, and it's not just my own, was that if you want more equality in terms of redistribution of wealth, you need a community of solidarity. That is, you can't be an internationalist left. If you want people to give their share or contribute to the welfare of others, you can do it only within the nation state, which is bound by solidarity. And you know, the examples are easy to come by. If you look, the Germans have a welfare state, but they're not very tolerant when the Greeks need it.
So what was it that moved you to the right?
On the important side in Israel, which is war and peace and foreign relations, I was disappointed with Oslo. That's probably the major theme, but it was gradual, because at first I saw that Arafat who was the head of the PLO, the PLO, and then the Palestinian Authority, was supporting terrorism. I said that doesn't work. And then came Ehud Barak, and Ehud Barak said the whole Oslo process was built on gradual confidence-building measures, and he said this gradualism is just causing friction, not building any confidence. So let's just cut to the chase. Yeah, and he went the furthest Israel can go, including division of Jerusalem, including joint sovereignty in the Temple Mount, which is very hard for Israelis to swallow. And Arafat said no. And then, along with the rest of Israel, I came to the conclusion that the Palestinian plan is not peace. It's to sink Zionism demographically in an Arab majority. And in order to do that, they need to cling to us. So they're going to hug us to death. So I supported unilateralism, and I supported leaving Gaza.
So by 2006, then are you already calling yourself a right winger, or are you still thinking of yourself as somebody who's on the left, but you've become disaffected with Oslo?
Yeah, I tend to the other definition, and also I thought if their plan is to hug us to death, let's force them to separate for our sake. And note that my argument was still not anti-national. When I drive the Haaretz readers out of their mind is when I tell them that the human rights argument against the occupation doesn't work. It doesn't work because if you're...
Sorry for interrupting. We have to tell your American viewers here that you are also a columnist for Haaretz.
Yeah.
And that you're about the only guy on the right, I think, writing for Haaretz. Is there anyone else? I don't think so.
Yeah, there are, but most of them, they tend to, I'm sort of an exception because they tend to take a settler, a religious settler for the extreme right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that is an exception that proves the rule. And I have to say, and a lot of people told me this would not happen in the New York Times because I am I'm the worst thing in terms of their arguments. In Israel, we say shooting inside the nagmash. It's you're shooting inside their car. Yeah. And they tolerate this, and it generates controversy.
Is an armored vehicle, right? A personnel carrier. Is that?
Yeah. So when I want to really annoy them, I say that the human rights argument is an argument for the occupation, not against it, because anywhere we leave, it only gets worse. So the truth is that only if you argue from collective rights can you argue against the occupation. Now, so I supported unilateralism and the withdrawal from Gaza, but they kept shooting at us after that. And they devote all their energy to the destruction of Israel. And also I realized, and I had this conversation, it was in a conference in Europe, and I was still smoking back then. So on the breaks, it was just me and the Arabs. I was the only Western guy smoking. So the smokers' corner was like the most interesting place. It was bleeding, freezing outside. But we stood there, me and the Arab guys. And I talked to Bassam Eid. You may know him. He's a human rights activist from the Palestinian side. And he broke with Israeli human rights organizations because he said, because they refused to publish human rights violation by the Palestinian Authority. So he's very brave. He's alive only because Warren Christopher intervened. Because after he started documenting human rights violations by the Palestinian Authority, Jibril Rajoub from the Palestinian Preventive Security Forces, that's a nice name now, the Bitachon HaMesakel, invited him for a talk, and you don't come back from these talks. So he called everyone he knew, and Warren Christopher saved him because he threatened Arafat. And Bassam Eid is standing there with me, and he said, you Israelis, you always talk about ending occupation. He said, we're not going to let you leave. And I said, what do you mean? You don't want the occupation to end? And he looked at me like I'm like a rookie. And he said, who will protect us? And, it's suddenly everything fell into place because these Fatah people, only Israel stands between them and Hamas. In Gaza, we left, and we left in 2005. In 2006, Hamas won the election. In 2007, they killed all the Fatah operatives. They threw them off buildings with blindfolded.
Yeah.
So so people talk about this as if we can reach an agreement, you know, the Obamacare vision, the Israeli left vision, as if we can reach an agreement with the PLO to leave. No, no.
When I was working in the White House in 2006, we had put together a package for Abu Mazen. The idea was to help build him up against Hamas, and we put together a package of ways that we thought we could help. And we told him the kinds of things that we thought he needed to be doing, and told him the ways that we could help. And you know, and we had all kinds of ways of helping without our fingerprints being on it. If he didn't want that, if he did, we could do it that way. However he wanted to do it, but we really wanted him, you know, to build him up. And
what year is that?
2006, and he wasn't doing anything. In fact, he was doing nothing on any front. And a Israeli came through, and I said to the Israeli official came through the White House, and I said, I was young and naive, and I said, I don't understand Abu Mazen's strategy. And the Israeli guy, I don't want to say his name because I don't know if he wants to have this public or not, but he said he had a good sense of humor anyway, and he said he started laughing when I said strategy. He said strategy. He said it's obvious what his strategy is. And I said, what's that? And he said his strategy is fecklessness. And then I started laughing and he said, you think I'm joking? And I said, yeah. He said, I'm not joking. He said he wants to appear to you to be completely feckless so that you'll start doing everything for him. And I just filed it away. I didn't really make sense to me. But then I watched as we started to do everything for him, including negotiating with the Israelis. We would go and we started making demands in the name of Abu Mazen on Olmert.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I thought, you know, like, they know us better than we know ourselves, because they know if they just sit around and do nothing, we'll step in, and it's better for them, because then we start chipping away at the Israelis, and they don't have to put any cards. You know, they don't have to have any skin in the game. So it was amazing. And so it's funny. We've had the same kind of trajectory, because I was a great believer in Oslo. I had my reservations, but I was a great believer in it. And then slowly I got mugged by reality. But listen, let's not get. We can talk about that stuff forever. Let's get over to the coronavirus, which is what's on everybody's mind,
Sure.
and how I'm going to promote this first video. I'm going to say it's about how the coronavirus is going to change the world. So let's get your views on this. I'm sure you have some, because you have strong. That's another thing I like about you, is I know I'm going to get strong views.
Yeah, on this, someone joked on Israeli Twitter, is that Corona is going to completely change the world, in that it is going to absolutely prove what I believed before. And everybody behaves that way. You know,
that is so true. It is so true. In fact, everyone, I've been following all the predictions about how it's going to change the world, and everyone thinks it's going to change the world exactly in the way that they thought the world was changing before it. And by the way, I'm no different. I think I have my own ideas about this. I'll tell you those in a minute. But
I'm different. I'm different because I am right, as opposed to everyone else. So my point is actually going to be proven. So the thing is, you know, I've been writing a lot against the European Union, because I think the only viable, I think, you know, the post-Cold War and even the post-World War II intelligentsia in the West has indulged internationalist dreams in which there is nothing between the rights-carrying individual and the international order of universal humanity. And these people have reduced our ideas of human rights to what Isaiah Berlin called negative liberty, to non-intervention in my life. This is a concept very appealing to the rich, but not to the poor. And what this concept failed to give account of was, how is democracy going to work? And these are from the days of Reinhold Niebuhr, where I guess I heard about it first, the post-World War II generation and their idea of an international
Hold on
world government.
1 second. I just want to, because you packed a lot there together, I just want to make sure I follow the logic. So what you're saying is that they have a kind of, their concept of liberty is they have a very well-managed state and international order. I think what you're saying is run by managers. And
technocrats.
Technocratically managed society in which every individual has a certain area that is his or her domain, and the state can't intervene in that area. But they're not really.
I'm generally for that.
You're for that.
I'm not against negative liberty. I just think this is a very narrow concept of liberty, because it's a non-political concept, and all these internationalist ideas never give a serious account of how we are going to be sovereign over our own fate. They lack a concept of citizenship. So that in their dream global village, how do I influence the government? How do you operate the principle of government with the consent of the governed?
Well, they don't.
So you have liberty.
The people that I think are most captivated by that dream actually don't like a lot of their fellow citizens, don't you think? And don't trust them.
Exactly. I read this I recently read Lee Smith's amazing book, The Plot Against the President. And one thing he says about all these deep state apparatchiks is they say they wanted to save the republic from Donald Trump, but that's not true. They wanted to save the progressive Obama legacy from the people, because the people are deplorable. They're awful. They're clingers. They're terrible. And we should find a way to keep them out of the game.
Well, this is the big thing. I mean, for me, this is the greatest revelation of the last presidential election for me, was the number. You said they want to protect Obama's legacy. It's the number of progressives that exist on the right. I didn't understand this. This is over here, the whole Never Trump movement. There's two wings of the progressive movement. There's the left-wing progressives and there's the right-wing progressives. And I did not realize that. I thought I got it completely wrong when Trump got the nomination. I understood where Trump was coming from. I understood where his support in the country was coming from. And partly because of my own family background, it's not the people that are going out and supporting Trump and are excited by his candidacy. I don't regard them as ignorant. I don't regard them as racist. I think they have a certain view of the world that's totally coherent, and I understand why they want someone to represent them. And by the way, I like that part of America a lot. And I identify with it to a certain extent. And I was amazed at how many of and I think it is that part of America is a huge mainstay of the right. These are people who are going to vote for the right, going to vote for personal liberty, the things that we care about. And
but don't you find that New Deal Democrats, or some of them, have also switched and voted for Trump? Like the simple.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's like I think of it as the Harry Truman left. The Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, but that was the stream of the left that went in and became Reagan Democrats. So it's sort of Reagan Democrats, and the right. It's not. Trumpism isn't an inherently right-wing thing, right? But the way anyway, well, forget about it. The point I wanted to make was, I was amazed at how many of my former Bush administration, fellow officials, people that I thought of as sort of my cohort in Washington, were horrified by not just Trump himself, but also the support. and how much they identify with this internationalist, one worldist, technocratic view, progressive view of the world. That was a real revelation, because I think that personally, progressivism is the enemy politically. I can, given my educational background and my expertise and all that, I can swim in those waters pretty comfortably. But the hostility to representative democracy is really troubling.
Yeah, it is. And I must confess that I was horrified when Trump got elected, because I had no idea that he represented anything. I was reading the liberal press,
Right.
and I saw him, bits and pieces of him, on The Apprentice and in tabloids. And when I lived in New York, when I studied, I saw him interviewed by Ali G and Sacha Baron Cohen, and he just got up and when he got it immediately that this was a hoax, and he got up and left. And I thought he was just a brute, vulgar bully without any education and any knowledge of the world. So I talked to my liberal friends, some of them intelligent Americans, and to this day, and later I learned he represents a worldview, and it's pretty coherent. And my epiphany was, I went to interview Stephen Bannon for Haaretz. I lost a lot of friends over this, you must know. Even talking to Steve Bannon was considered...
A lot of Israeli friends or a lot of American friends?
Israeli friends. Israeli
really?
friends. Yeah, intellectual friends.
Oh, that's
yeah,
surprising. That surprises me.
People start... and there was also Todd Gitlin, and a former teacher of mine in Israel wrote a joint piece in Haaretz called Gadi Taub has no difficult questions for Steve Bannon, in which they meant, why didn't you call him out as a racist? To which the answer is that he isn't, to the best of my knowledge. But my thought is, and I guess I got that from interviews with him, is that Trump was just the hardware and Steve Bannon was the software running it. So I said, why don't we study the software so we know what this is? And I came back with a conversation, and Bannon gave me his spiel, and it's a pretty orderly and coherent view of the world. But one thing about it is I find incredibly convincing, is that this elite is benefiting from an international order from which their fellow countrymen are being screwed over, and they don't care. Also, they are in cahoots with China, which and from the Israeli perspective, Iran too. And I started saying my first step into understanding what Trump is doing was, hey, he walked out on the Iran deal and he called out China. If this is all he does in the world, that's more than everyone back to Reagan.
Right.
So
right. The thing that I professionally, the thing that I professionally care the
just
most.
One last thing is that the people, I've been arguing this, and people keep telling me he has no policy. You don't understand. They say he has no, and to my view, forget what he talks. What he does is incredibly coherent.
What he does is coherent, and what he says is coherent too. I mean, he has a certain style of speaking that when Trump says 2 billion, it means big number, right? It doesn't. You can't. They always fact check him on the 2 billion. It wasn't 2 billion. It was.
That's stupid.
It was. It was only 483 million.
Let me quote Andrew McCarty for you, because he had the most brilliant, I think, definition. He said he quoted this tweet when Trump said, Obama tapped my wires. You remember that?
Yeah.
And he said, and Andrew McCarty says, this was classical Trump, because it's not true and it's vulgar, but it's always in the general vicinity of the truth. And this is like, it's like a volley in the right direction.
Yeah, there's so much evidence now that they. Anyway, I don't want to get off on that. Don't want to get off on Trump. Let's get to the coronavirus, because there's a thesis. There's a thesis in here that you're heading toward, I think. Let me tell you what the thesis is. And that is
sure.
that you it sounds to me like what you're going to say is that nationalism, Trump-style nationalism, is is going to be the winner in the world as a result of this. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm hoping. And I'll tell you why. Because I was, as you know, because we've exchanged some drafts, and you helped me with this a little bit. But I was arguing against Yuval Noah Harari, who said, you know, the message from the coronavirus should be not atavistic nationalism, not national boundaries. It should be greater global cooperation. And the last thing you want is someone like Trump who's saying, I'll take care of myself, America first. And my hope is that one thing I hope will emerge from this is that I hope to God that Trump takes care first of the American economy, because otherwise the alternative is that China is going to be the next Marshall Plan for Europe, and God forbid for America. And that would be horrible. So the whole idea that nationalism is a negation of the other is you know, it's like saying that individualism is a negation of the family. If you love yourself, you hate your wife. I'm a Herzlian. You know, Herzl believed, like Woodrow Wilson, like Giuseppe Mazzini, in the family of nations. And my favorite metaphor for this is, you know, I don't know why, but it almost brings tears to my eyes to listen to this. I'm so touched. And it's the stupidest thing to be touched by, because it's this technical a safety instruction in flight videos, where they tell you that if you're traveling with someone in need of assistance, put your own mask first and only then assist them. And of course, I was in pilot's training. They kicked me out in the end. I was not good enough. But one thing you learn is that when oxygen is lost, you lose your ability to think straight within seconds. So I know what the reason for this is. And you're not going to be able to take care of the child if you don't put your own mask first.
Right.
So this is what I think about the coronavirus. If America doesn't put its own mask first, the whole order, which is the democratic West, is going to collapse without American support, because we're not going to trust Angela Merkel.
Okay, but let's talk a little bit about Harari, because you threw that name out and you said you argued against them. Just who is he? What does he represent in general? And what's the essence of your critique, other than what you just said?
Yuval Noah Harari is an Israeli historian. He is, you know, I went to in a trip to India, and I stood in a dirty urban in Mumbai train station, and there was like this shabby little book stand, and it had 2 Harari titles out of maybe 25 books it showcased. So Harari is an international bestseller. He wrote his first bestseller was A Short History of Humanity, and he is the idol of progressives. They love him the world over. And it's exactly this neoliberal, progressive, internationalist, global village, George Soros Open Society Foundation kind of philosophy. Yeah. And so he became the Pope of globalism. And immediately when the corona broke out, he started attacking Trump, Netanyahu, and arguing desperately against nationalism. And he was silent about the most important things, because what was happening, and you saw it in Europe, is that the European Union was completely helpless in dealing with the plague. They even refused to allocate money to corona research, because I don't remember what the problem was. But nation states started hoarding their own medical supplies and closing their own border, because they were taking care of themselves, but also they were regaining control over their common fate, because nobody else was doing it. And my argument was that in order to achieve international cooperation, you don't need to first suppress national solidarity. And I think there's a good reason why people turn to the nation state, because we ever since World War II, we remember what horrors extreme nationalism can bring, but we rarely remember that nationalism also brings the best in us, so that a national community can demand self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Maybe it's sad, but no other people are not going to sacrifice for abstract humanity, maybe in some conditions. But in the event of
Well,
a pandemic like this,
Harari just sacrificed for all of humanity. He just gave how many? Did he get $1 million? Did he give?
yeah, he gave $1 million to. Let me get that tweet. Maybe he gave $1 million to the World Health
To the
Organization.
WHO.
Yeah, and
That's
this was.
That's not a sacrifice.
Here's the announcement. It's his foundation, he and his husband, who is also his manager. And they said that the great enemy is not the virus, but inner demons of humankind, hatred and greed. And unfortunately, they said,
yeah.
The US president has chosen this moment to halt funding for the WHO, because Harari's whole argument is that internationalism is good and nationalism is bad, and therefore Orange Man bad.
That's what gets me about these guys is that the critique is always a critique of Trump. Where's Harari's critique of Xi Jinping and the Chinese? And
nothing.
Why is that? How come the Chinese get a pass?
I don't want to make a reductionist argument, but I can tell you about Harari.
Go ahead. I feel it coming.
because Harari is also famous for taking out the critique of Putin from his book 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and replacing it with a critique of Trump in order for the Russian edition.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember that now. I forgot that little episode. Yeah. So
now I also want to show you this amazing slide, and this is. I can't read it either, but it's a Hong Kong reader bookstore. I don't know what the size of this bestseller list is or how representative it is, but Harari is number 4 here, as you see. Yeah. So apparently he's a big hit and I heard he's a bestseller. Imagine what that might mean, a bestseller in China. He was probably a millionaire only from that, and he has, I think, speaking engagement there, but I don't want to reduce it only to that, because he is a true believer in this internationalist order. But there is a big hole in all these things.
If you make enough money,
he critiques
it makes it easier to be a believer.
Easier.
But you know,
but he criticized Netanyahu for exercising surveillance over Israel, because for the corona pandemic, we have now an application in a cell phone that tells us who has corona and if we cross paths. And this is an unpleasant thing. It's intrusive, but it's very helpful in this crisis. But somehow Chinese surveillance is not a topic that bothers Harari. And Netanyahu, he wrote, has attacked democracy, no less than that. So he's what Trump did. I think the WHO is providing a moral umbrella for the spreading of this disease by the Chinese. I took it from your tweet, Mike. I took your tweet that said that the Chinese segregated Wuhan area, but kept on allowing flights to the rest of the world. Right. And the World Health Organization refused to listen to the complaints of Taiwan, to the information that was given it, and basically helped spread this disease. So Trump is very, very right to call it to account. And now these internationalists are even, here, I'll say it very succinctly. In this international order, it was a heaven for Chinese bullying. And China is a very, very dangerous thing. How come, if you're such a humanist and internationalist, you don't feel you have to give some account on what you're going to do against China? So maybe it may go in various ways, but one lesson people might learn is a kind of a metaphor from the corona, that China is not a benign force. And Trump has turned the ship of policy away from that. I think even a Democratic administration will not turn it back.
I just want to make sure I understand your thinking. Before, you mentioned that when you interviewed Bannon, you thought Trump was the hardware, Bannon was the software. but I think your view must have evolved now, and you think that Trump has actually got his own software, and he doesn't need
He has his
he doesn't
software.
need to be plugged into Bannon. I mean, that was a Bannon's view of Bannon's role was probably a little bit outsized, right? Am I?
Yeah, I think he regrets it because the way I understand it, he was dismissed after this book, The Devil's Bargain, on which, if I don't know if you saw the cover, Josh
Yeah,
Green, but they're holding each other's shoulders like equals.
yeah.
And I thought a chief doesn't like his advisor to be portrayed the same as an equal, a co-equal partner. But then, Trump's last speech at the UN it's before the corona, and it was exactly the view of the family of nations. It was right on target on everything. So I found myself nodding in agreement. And this is, when I first wrote about the internationalists, I did something very naughty, because I knew it would drive Haaretz readers crazy. So I started with a quote from Marine Le Pen. And it's everybody talked about my piece because he said Marine Le Pen, and Marine Le Pen said,
you quoted Marine Le Pen approvingly is the problem, right?
I quoted her on something that I thought she was right on.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
she said that the big political struggle of our time is between patriots and globalists. And then bumped it later in the UN in exactly this phrase. But I write for Haaretz for a long time, so I knew what I was doing because the piece was then all over Twitter and everywhere. And the message came across. And the message is that I think that this struggle also has a sociological view in which Harari fits perfectly, because some of these people, usually very wealthy or in professions that can be handled from their laptop computers, is they are an internationalist class, and their social milieu, their livelihood, their moral horizons are all tied more strongly to their equals in another country than to their own countrymen. And these people are working together, as in the European Union, to reduce the power of democracy in favor of a technocratic elite. And look at the structure of the European Union. If you look at the European Council, these are people who are more accountable to each other than to their publics. This is the dynamic it creates.
Yeah, yeah, and what's so interesting about this crisis is that I think that the culpability of China here is absolutely inescapable. There's the whole question about whether the virus started in the wet market in Wuhan, or whether it was in this institute,
lab, in the virus lab,
the virological institute or lab or whatever. Who knows? But either way, they're culpable, because if it started in the wet market, they lied about it, they covered it up, they prevented as you mentioned, they allowed flights to leave after they were already not allowing Chinese to travel, so they spread it around the world. So they're culpable, but the opponents of Trump and the opponents of nationalism don't want to focus on that. They don't want to admit it, or they want to just kind of avoid the question, because they want to make sure that the real fight here is between globalism and nationalism, and they want to make sure that nationalism loses. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I would not have predicted after Trump was elected, that this issue would last this long, because this whole family of nations concept is the one that I grew up on. It's the one that we fought World War II on. If you look at the essential documents of NATO, they're not talking about building one Europe. They're talking about NATO is built on the idea of each country, taking care of its oxygen mask first. It's all really clear that nationalism is built into the fundamental documents of NATO. And and I knew that the universities, because I had taught at a university, I knew that the universities have been teaching this one worldism and anti-nationalism for a couple of generations, but I didn't realize how powerful it had become, and how much of a kind of infrastructure it had internationally. So I thought that Trump was a corrective, and people were quickly going to adjust. And because it was obvious to me that, you know, the minute we had this thing over the national anthem here, you know, I don't know if you know about the, you know about the
Yeah,
football
yeah,
players
the
kneeling. Yeah,
athletes.
and Trump chose that to fight with everyone over the national anthem. And I what I thought was amazing is that people actually decided that it was a good idea to have this fight with him, because they don't understand that 70% of the country really loves the flag and the national anthem. It means something to them, and Trump understands this. I mean, this is politics 101, and they didn't get it because they only talk to people who find that silly, which is a sliver of the country. It's not enough to elect a president. So, but I thought they would wake up. I thought they'd wake up. I thought they'd realize their mistake, because the right doesn't own the flag, and I thought that the next candidate for the Democrats would be somebody who understood family of nations, patriotism, and so on.
And it's the same here too, because the extreme left, the left used to, when I was growing up, I was going to Shalom Achshav, Peace Now demonstrations. So my family my father is a centrist, but we were generally on the left, and the left took care to sing the national anthem at the end of demonstrations. And now I was on the wrong side, of course, of this demonstration of, you know, chic people, you know, the radical chic, as Tom Wolfe would call it, demonstrating for the rights of illegal workers here, illegal immigrants. And they ended up with Imagine, John Lennon's Imagine. And this is, you know, the intelligentsia, the internationalist intelligentsia, this makes total sense to them. Because how did the demonstration work? They brought little kids who spoke perfect Hebrew, who were born here, to illegals, and they said, but we are human too. Who could object to that? And then they sang Imagine. And this is the same, I think, the same quarrel like the one over the anthem in America, and the one about borders. So if the lessons of Corona are going to be, first, national borders are important. You know, people forget Bill Clinton argued for stronger border policy. Barack Obama in the beginning because a nation must defend its borders or else.
Bernie
Sanders,
there was a great little clip that went around social media a year or two ago, where Bernie Sanders just laid it out very clearly and said, of course you have to have borders, because without borders you don't have citizenship. You can't have an open border.
Bingo.
Right? But I noticed, I mean, it was just second nature to him, right? But then I noticed that during this round, that was not a theme. And that's what
doesn't pass with progressives now.
That's what shocks me, is that these things, which should just be common sense. It's not racism to want borders. It's not racism to think of a family of nations. But I would have thought that this would all just kind of come back, that it's so deep in the culture. But apparently I'm wrong. We have a struggle on our hands. And
oh yeah, and it's amazing. It's the same struggle everywhere. I mean, we can talk about it at other times. Like all the major issues Americans are grappling now, you can find in Israel too, from deep state to illegal immigration. And this illegal immigration thing is so telling about the internationalist order, because I can see why it's appealing to George Soros. But if you are an old lady living in the south of Tel Aviv, a Holocaust survivor, and suddenly all your neighborhood has been taken over by young men, because these are illegal immigrants who came to work. They're not refugees.
Yeah.
It's a completely alien culture. You don't have, in Israel, we have Va'ad Habayit. How would you say? Like if you have a co-op, there's like a board. And there's no board. So the lady living on the top floor, her ceiling is dripping, there's no one to fix it, and she doesn't have money to get out of the neighborhood. So globalism doesn't look so brilliant when you're living in a poor neighborhood. And it's the elites are preaching to this lady that she's a racist. But they're not paying the price for this policy. And they're talking about the human rights of immigrants, while for her, it's very clear that if immigrants would have equal right with her, then there would be no civil rights. There would be your democratic power to exercise control over your government will be lost and we'll all be immigrants. For her, globalism is we all will have no rights.
Listen, okay, we're going to have to wrap this up because we've gone on for an hour, because you have too much to say. But let me just ask you.
Fast.
Let me close here with a question for you though, because I want a prediction. So the essence here is the struggle. The big fight of the day of this era is globalism versus nationalism, or I would actually say democratic sovereignty, right?
Exactly.
The issue
exactly.
is
because I'm not for Chinese aggression.
Yeah.
This is not the kind of nationalism I support. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not. It's not a blood and soil concept. It's citizenship, and the right of each country to go its own way, versus this kind of globalist view. Okay, so what do you think then? I need a prediction. When the dust settles, does the coronavirus crisis strengthen the democratic sovereignty, or does it strengthen the globalists? Is Harari's career going to is it going to get bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger, or smaller and smaller?
Well, I don't know. I think he's going to keep selling in China. I'm sure in any case. But these are two questions. One, and we intellectuals, we tend to think that everything is the argument. So one question is, are we going to win the argument? The other question is China going to be stronger than America? So in this, everything hangs on this. Europe has lived in a universe where other people took care of their real interests, so they can just be narcissistic. So you can't trust them. My friend Dan Shiftan, you know Dan Shiftan, says, when in doubt, ask a European and then do the opposite. So it's basically America versus China. So I dearly hope that America is going to be able to go back on track, restraining China. Does this mean that we're also going to win the argument? I think that would take a long time, but I think we earned some points because
that's a good way of it's a good way of putting it. Because just I'll give you the last word in 1 second, but just a lot is going to depend on how the public thinks Donald Trump did in fighting the coronavirus, and the left clearly understands this. I mean, they've decided to make the claim of incompetence in fighting the coronavirus the position that they're going to fight on, the hill that they're going to fight on. And if by the time this thing ends, if the economy is in a shambles and people think that he didn't do a good job, then the democratic sovereignty loses the argument, even if it on intellectual terms it scored a lot of points. So anyway, you get the last word.
I fear that's the case. So I'll save my last word for this. If the argument is conducted honestly, then Trump would have proven right, even if he was late to react to the corona. I'm not sure that that's the actual case. But I hope what people will remember is that when he stopped flights to China, the Democrats were calling it racist. So this is PC denying the world, which we should be careful of. And I also hope they would remember the dealings of the Biden and Kerry family in China. So I hope, if the metaphor is very abstract, that China and the virus are not a good thing, and Democrats wanting to appease China are not a good thing. So Trump is very good with strong metaphors. I hope he deploys this one as boldly and as effectively as he possibly can.
Okay, listen, Gadi, it was really great having you here on my inaugural, I don't know what to call this, podcast. What is
It's an
that
honor,
podcast?
Mike.
It's
Vidcast.
my vidcast, my inaugural vidcast. I really appreciate it. But we've gone over
Thank
time,
you. It
and
was a
we're going to have
pleasure.
to call it into it. Thanks a lot, and I hope to see you again.
Same here. Thanks.
Bye.